Nova was a happy, healthy baby, loving life, starting to find her feet, one thinking about walking. It was September last year, so she just turned 11 months. She was loving life. Her older brother Jazz had just started school. I was just about to return to work from maternity leave, and she was starting settling in sessions at nursery. She didn't have any signs of being poorly. She went to bed on a Wednesday evening just as she would normally, with the normal chaos and things at home. Woke at about 11 o'clock that evening. Not unlike her, she was never a very good sleeper. And I went in to check on her and try and settle her. And I picked her up and I started feeding her because it was normally the quickest way to get her back to sleep. And I noticed as she was feeding that she was shaking, which had never happened before. And so I took her back into our bedroom, showed my husband, and she wasn't upset. She was calm, but her whole body was shaking. We weren't sure if it was a febrile seizure at the time, so we called 111 initially, because she was, her eyes were still making contact with us and things like that. 111 triaged us and put us through to 999. We were waiting for an ambulance to come. She didn't have a temperature at this time. She was kind of alert and all fine. We waited about half an hour, and in this time she stopped shaking. We were downstairs because I'd kind of got everything ready to get in the ambulance with her and take her to hospital. And she was just kind of sat on her dad's lap, just looking around, a bit confused, like, why aren't we in bed? Why are we down here and it's dark? And what's mummy doing? And so at that point, I really thought, oh, maybe she was, I just kind of thought, I don't think this is anything serious. I don't think it's anything to worry about, but we need to get her checked. After 40 minutes, 999 called back and said, we're really sorry, you're top of the list, but there's no ambulance available at the moment. And I said, well, she's stopped shaking now. And so and she's alert and okay. I'm happy to drive her in because I didn't want to put her in a car seat if she was having a seizure or anything. We don't live too far from the hospital, so I drove with Nova in the car. We went to our A&E department. We were seen really quickly, triaged by the doctor, and because she didn't have any of those signs anymore, they were kind of like, they checked her temperature, looked in her ears and her throat and things, and they said, we're not really sure what that was about. We would just like to rule out a water infection. Can you stay in? Let's try and get a sample from her, which is really difficult to try and catch a urine sample from a baby. I was, with a tiny pot trying to catch it. And that doctor that triaged us, we've spoken to her since, and she said she doesn't know what made her keep us in because she would have countless other times sent a family home in that instance. She did. And whilst we were waiting for us to be able to catch the urine sample, Nova's temperature suddenly spiked to over 40 degrees. Breathing then started to get a lot more rapid. She'd had the nostril flaring. We were quickly then moved into resus. Nova was given intravenous antibiotics pretty quickly. She had oxygen. She started responding really well to both of those things. She was a lot more alert. Her breathing speed reduced and things. They did take, I can't remember what they call it now, but a blood sample to check her lactate levels and things like that. And it was slightly raised. They gave her another set of antibiotics and wanted to see if she continued to improve, which she did. So we were then moved up to the ward just for further monitoring. We moved up, this whole time, Nova was chilled. She didn't have a rash. She wasn't in distress. She was very calm and relaxed and just taking everything in. I just kind of felt like she's probably absolutely exhausted because she hadn't slept again since 11 o'clock. And by the time we went up, it was about 6 a.m. And I said, as they were, asking me all the questions to, enroll her onto the ward, I said, oh, do you mind if I give her another breastfeed? Because I think she might be thirsty, and also it might just help her have a little sleep. And they were like, oh yeah, of course, go for it. And she was calm and happy feeding. And then once she finished, she didn't fall asleep, but they wanted to check her blood pressure. So I put her down on the bed. And at that point, we noticed on her bottom, she started to have a rash. And she also just started, like rolling around a bit, like she was like struggling to keep consciousness. So then we were taken into the pediatric resus room, and that was about 6:30 in the morning. And from there, she just deteriorated in minutes. My husband hadn't come into hospital because we had our son at home. And so I called him and just said, this isn't going well. You need to get someone to look after Jazz and get him to school. I think you need to get here. We live in a remote area of North Devon. So although the hospital's not far away, it's not a large hospital. They have a children's ward, but not a specialist children's hospital. So they had requested for the transport from Bristol Hospital to come collect and retrieve Nova and take her to Bristol Hospital. They intubated her. Luckily, my husband got to the hospital just before Nova was put to sleep, so that she knew that her dad was there. And they had a little moment together. And, from there, things are a little bit of a blur in terms of what happened. It wasn't until we had our follow-up meeting with the hospital, I didn't really know what time kind of things happened and when. The Bristol specialist team arrived, but they couldn't stabilize her enough to get her into the ambulance, to get her to the hospital. And unfortunately, she passed away at 12:30 that afternoon. The speed at which she deteriorated from being, a healthy, fully happy, normal child, going to bed at 7 o'clock in the evening and, waking up slightly differently and there wasn't something quite right at 11 o'clock, to then her being gone the following lunchtime is still a really hard thing to comprehend, that sepsis can do that. Obviously, at that point, we didn't know for definite it was sepsis. The doctors had been communicating to us that they thought it was either sepsis or it could be meningitis. Not long after Nova died, we were still with her in the hospital, and they did come in and say, look, we've confirmed that we think it was sepsis, and we think that it was a strep infection that was the cause of that. But we're doing further tests to figure out exactly what it was. And I think, having learned a lot about sepsis in the last since Nova died, don't often get those answers as quickly as we did. We did have to have police involvement until we knew for definite, just as part of that unexpected child death protocol. But within 24 hours of Nova passing away, we had a cause of death as sepsis caused by a strep pneumoniae infection. And that's a really common infection that lots of children and adults will get, and they recover quite easily. It's part of the childhood inoculation program, which Nova was all up to date with, but unfortunately it was a strain that's not covered there, and we will never really know why that infection led to such a overwhelming sepsis response in Nova's body. But it did, and it's that terrifying speed and that uncontrollable element of it, which has been a really huge thing for us to process, and we're still trying to understand that. We were with her the whole time. When they intubated her, we left the room because they said it was kind of an invasive thing that we might not have wanted to have watched. And at that point, the consultant sat with us and said, look, in terms of how she is doing and responding, we're giving her everything we possibly could and can do. She's not able to respond, and this isn't likely going to be a positive outcome. And I remember at that point we were sat on seats and it just all felt like it was happening so fast. I just fell off of my seat and collapsed onto the floor, because it's just really hard to comprehend that, when I really, a few hours earlier, just thought we were going to be sent home from hospital and say, give her some Calpol and keep an eye on her. And at that point, after the consultant spoke with us, they then said, oh, she's gone into cardiac arrest. Do you want to come back in? This might be the last few moments. And so we went straight in, and some of the staff were giving her CPR. They said, oh, you can talk to her. And so we said, we're here, and we were kind of in desperate times, kind of pleading, shouting, doing everything we could. And as she heard our voices, she then responded to the CPR, and they found a heartbeat, and she really tried to rally through. And that happened 2 or 3 times. And so I think during that process, I also remember there was a moment holding on to her hand, speaking to her as they were trying to save her life, that I also I suppose thought if she recovers, I'm not sure what life she'll have. And even if it happened in moments and seconds, I suppose I felt like I wasn't really in the room, but I knew what was happening. I knew that nothing positive really was going to come out of where we were at that point. I suppose I thought my life was over at that point as well. To begin with, we weren't sure. Neither me or my husband or anyone in our immediate family are medical experts. So we had to go on what we were told by the hospital and act in good faith. So Nova died at the 21st of September, and we had a report that the hospital shared with us, and they kind of the hospital, in fact, were fantastic, and they were very much, do this at your pace. And so once they shared their report, they made it, they had lots of evidence and proof that, they even looked at if Nova had have already been in the intensive care ward at Bristol Children's Hospital or another specialist children's hospital, would they have done anything differently to change the outcome? And they had experts from Bristol review the case and confirm that there was nothing else they would have been able to have done for her. And I think we also then, that's when the team at the Sepsis Trust have been really supportive, because we acted in good faith and took on board what the hospital was saying, but sometimes you just need to be sure of that, especially because we don't know. And through the relationships that the Sepsis Trust have with various law firms that specialise in sepsis cases, we were able to get somebody completely independent, but from an expert point of view in one of those law firms, review that report, have a call with us really promptly and so caring and with such support, and they kind of ratified that and confirmed it for us. So I think that will be a comfort for us, and I'm sure more people I meet that through this experience that have lost loved ones to sepsis, I can only imagine the huge hurt and hard it is if you could have been things that could have been done differently to change the outcome. I guess from our point of view, because that's the experience we know, the difficulty I have and where I, struggle to sleep at night and things is knowing that can happen to somebody else and nothing else would change. I can't just be rest assured that, if that doctor could learn or whatever it might be, like what I've learned is that nothing would have changed that, which means that can happen to other children, other adults, and that's terrifying, I suppose. Growing up, I always believed you live in a great country that has a fantastic health service available to all. If you are healthy and you make the right lifestyle choices, as long as you get to a hospital in the right time, if you're ill with an infection, that you will get better. Naively, I thought that, and obviously now I know that's really not the case, and that's a hard thing to live by, especially with Jazz and having another child. Trying not to over catastrophize if he comes home with ear infection, which happened a few weeks ago, or I know there's chickenpox doing the rounds in his class at the moment and he hasn't had it. And I'm just terrified of those moments of him getting ill and us not being able to save him too. I think that was one of the things in those immediate hours after Nova died. Actually, as a parent, we're doing everything we can to be there for Nova, but we were very aware that we needed to be there for him. And this was he's 4, as such an important moment for us to deal with in the right way for him. You never know if you do these things right for your kids, but both my husband and I wanted to be there to tell him. We'd got somebody to pick him up from school for us. We hadn't told the friend that collected him what had happened, and so we left my mum sitting there cuddling Nova, and said we both are going to go and collect him and bring him back to the hospital. And we wanted him to be as much a part of understanding this as we were, because it's hard for adults to comprehend it, and without him being able to see Nova and say goodbye to her physically, I wasn't sure how we would be able to explain that to him if he never saw her again. So we went to collect him from our friend's house. We took him into the car and we told him in the car and said, let's go and give her a cuddle, read her a story, and we'll say goodbye to her and you can see her at the hospital. There was some baby loss charities that have provided some boxes at the hospital, one of which had, like, for siblings, it was a little teddy bear, and one that he could give to Nova, so she could have one from Nova and one from Nova to Jazz. And so we had the one that he was going to give to her with us, and we'd left the other one with Nova, and kind of explained that to him as that was going to be a nice way for them to bond and give each other a final loving gift. He spent time with her. He picked a story for us to all read with her, and we took hand and foot casts, and he was there in that. And I don't even know if he fully will ever remember that being 4, but I'm hoping somewhere in his psyche that will be a big part of it. And I think that's what we've tried to do ever since, is not, him feel separate and that it's not happened to him, or that we're making decisions or talking about it whispered in the corner, but that we're quite open and honest. Another thing we did is that when we were planning Nova's funeral, we chose a wicker casket for her. And the company that make them had an option for families to come and weave it with the team. And so we took Jazz with us as again, another really physical way for him to do something. It was like, a Moses basket, like she used to sleep in when she was really little. And we call it Nova's basket still at home now. It's not her coffin, it's her basket. And I think some of those steps were really helpful for him to process and feel part of preparing to say goodbye to his sister and processing it all. I guess the difficult part has been, what do you do after those things happen, and how do we support him in his grief now and in the rest of his life? And that's probably where we struggle a lot more. I haven't yet been able to find really great, valuable support and resources for that. I think there is a lot for older children. There's other charities that do, like 7-year-olds and over, but in terms of some of knowing how to respond to some of his questions or his behavioral changes are difficult, and he still does find it really hard to figure out where she is and what happens to her, because we buried Nova, so he was there at the funeral and he saw where she went, and there's now a gravestone that we visit. It's really close to our house, but we also talk about her body then helped the trees to grow in the graveyard, and plants feeding the animals and the insects. But we also talk about her spirit, and she's a star. Obviously, with the name Nova, it really resonates with us that she's now a star in the sky looking over us. And that concept is very difficult for him to understand, because he's like, but is her body there? Where is she? And it's all that kind of stuff. Emotionally, just knowing what the right or wrong thing to do is, or how to best support him, is really tricky. I feel really lonely. I think that's it's something I have felt a lot over the last months and weeks. I think it's because I realize I'm never going to be the same as other people. And I've got fantastic friends and family that are a great support, but nobody I really know in my close network has lost a child, and you're forever different from everyone else. And I also feel really guilty that I'm still living and still going about my life. There'll be times where, if I do catch myself laughing or smiling or enjoying something Jazz has done at school, feeling really proud of his achievements. Guilt is a huge thing, and I know motherhood guilt is a common theme anyway, but I think it's like just huge to figure out. Like, I know that living is a privilege. Nova would have loved to have grown older. She didn't even get to have one birthday. She would have loved to have 36 that I've had. But it's really hard to make the most of life and feel like embracing that privilege and really living life to the full, when I feel like I shouldn't, because my daughter's died and it's not the same without her. Everything does just feel like I'm living life in grayscale. Probably just a real lack of energy and also not being able to really nurture myself, like my own priorities of whether that is washing or eating healthily, not overeating and eating sugar all night, which is something I definitely do a lot more of. I just not putting any priority on myself. And that's a really hard thing to feel like, because again, I feel guilty to do that. And just what's the point without her? Why bother? Another thing that went through my mind that afternoon in the hospital was thinking, my life's over. I guess I just thought no marriage will survive this. And this is gonna drive us apart. I don't know what I based that on, but that was what I thought, and I've said that to him, so it's not a big revelation. Actually, I think it's the opposite. This huge thing only happened to the two of us in that we are the only two people that are Nova's parents in the world, and we were both present that day. And it's meant that, I actually said this to my mum at Christmas. I said, there isn't anyone else in the world I would want to be going through this with than Dickon. And I believe that still now. We had a great relationship beforehand. I now feel like he knows me more than I ever thought he would ever know how I feel about things and respond and what I need and how to best to support me. And hopefully he likewise, that we've done a lot of work on that. We do counselling together, we see a psychotherapist together, we also see a grief coach together, which has been really impactful in how we have processed Nova's death and how we have made decisions about what we will do as a family to remember her, to nurture our grief, and to think about our life moving forwards. And I think making the decision to do those things together has been really helpful in that. I've had a number of calls with the support team, so Katie there, particularly in those immediate weeks and months after Nova died. I had a few calls with her, and firstly, I was just still trying to get my head around what sepsis is. How does it affect the body? How did it happen so quickly? Did something happen that shouldn't have? And her experience and knowledge was just incredible, and was able to explain it in a way that made sense to me, more so than I'd had from any other medical professional. And so, her knowledge of sepsis has been hugely beneficial for us just figuring out what this is, but also just knowing that she understands what it's like through her lived experiences and through the people that she works with and supports has been really great. It's just almost like having those calls with her, I can feel like some of the things I'm feeling or thinking are really ugly or wrong or feeling ashamed of it. And I'll say them to her knowing there's no judgment, and she'll respond and be like, that's totally normal. I hear this a lot. And it's just knowing that that's okay and this is right, and that other people have experienced this has been really helpful. I'm also a member of the Facebook bereavement group, and that again, just engaging and seeing other people's stories and that it happens to other people is helpful, because like I said, I do feel really lonely in this. And so just seeing how other people are processing their loss is really helpful too. So there's some small things and some big things. One of the things that our grief coach has had us helped us create is Nova loved food, and her favorite foods were strawberries and tomatoes. Like she couldn't get enough of either of them. And something we've been doing this summer is growing our own strawberries and tomatoes. And it's a really great physical thing that we can actually nurture and do together. Daz loves watering them as much as I do, and seeing how the strawberries grow and watching the tomatoes get more and more red as the days go on. It's been a really positive thing. And eating those first strawberries when they were ready a few weeks ago was just amazing, because we were talking about, oh, Nova would have loved this. And actually, Jazz came up with a fantastic idea of we picked a few on the first day, and he said, oh, can we go and eat them at Nova's grave and leave one for her? And that is a small thing, but it's meant a great deal to all of us. And I suppose other things are talking about sepsis. Most people I speak to when they hear about Nova and what happened to her, said, "Oh, I'd never really knew about sepsis. I knew you could get sepsis from an infected cut or something like that, but not in this situation." I feel really strongly that I want as many people to know about sepsis and the fact that it isn't just about an infection of a cut, or it doesn't always just present itself with a rash. And it can be terrifyingly fast, that if you ever have any concerns, there are so many different ways that sepsis presents itself. If anything, like I just keep saying to everybody, if you're ever unsure, just see a medical professional and ask them, could it be sepsis? And then I guess there's other things we're doing. My work has been a really fantastic support. I came back to work at the start of the year, and they have just been, really nurturing and supportive of me, but they also have wanted to do some things to help honour and remember Nova. So we've actually just completed, we have a team that works across Europe. So we've walked from the most northern part in North Scotland to the most southerly part, Malaga in Spain, and the most westerly, which is me and Devon, to the most easterly, which is a colleague in Bulgaria. We calculated that distance, and between us have walked those steps. So it was 4,000 kilometers or 5 million steps, which we completed, and through that I've raised £3,000 for the Sepsis Trust. And it was just such a great experience because we all live and work separately. We work remotely. We got to do that together, and everyone was saying that they were going out with their family, with friends, and whilst they were there, were talking about why they were doing it, and remembering Nova and honouring her. And that's a really lovely way to keep her memory alive, and for people to know that she mattered, and she still does matter and will forever. So I'm sure there'll be lots of other ideas of ways to fundraise and keep building that awareness of sepsis, because we're not going to let anyone forget about Nova. For parents with children, particularly young children, I think you know your child better than anybody else. And so if anything is showing that is different to how their personalities might normally be, or how they would respond to things, don't ignore it, and tell people, and make people listen, because you're the expert on them, and don't wait around. I think I am quite an optimistic person, or I used to be, and I think my tendency would always be, oh, I'm sure they'll be okay, let me just give it an hour, or let's put them to bed and see how they are in the morning. That is not a way I will be responding to anything going forward. So if you're ever unsure, don't wait, and you'll never be a bother, particularly with young children. I think medical professionals will always want to see them if you've got any doubts yourself, because you're the expert. And just to know that sepsis it doesn't just present itself as a rash and a high temperature. There are so many other symptoms of sepsis. They are obviously all listed, but there are also things that aren't listed that can be the body's response to sepsis. So like I say, if you're ever unsure of anything, just seek help, and don't wait around, don't waste time. We used to say before Nova died that she was just happy to be here, wherever here was. She made the most of every situation and people, and loved the experience of life. And I've obviously talked in this chat about it's really hard to enjoy life, but I do think we should all, champion and love and enjoy the everyday, because Nova would love to do that, and that's what I try and do. Yeah.